The design process for a shooting range. Let's talk about that for just a few minutes to give you some clarity on how to budget schedule wise, monetarily, what your budget should be for those expenditures, and then just being able to frame this process with your design team. There are three major categories or phases of design. They are schematic, design development, and construction documents. So there's three. I look at that process and add one to the beginning, which is kind of pre-schematics, which is through the budget process. You ought to be defining the building square footage on a per room, per use basis, retail, classroom, shooting ranges, etc., down to the restrooms and janitor closet. So once you have those uses and square footages that are allocated, then you can put together kind of a stick figure drawing of how you would anticipate them laying out. Be careful that you don't get married to that layout if you don't have property secured or under contract, or that you own it. Because once you start searching for property and you find the property that you think is suitable, that plan 9 times out of 10 is going to need to change to fit the property constraints, topo, parcel boundary lines, the way they're configured, dimensionally, access, parking, all of those, your stormwater detention measures, all of those are going to influence that layout that you have envisioned on paper, married with reality. So the schematics are going to then take the design from your budget and apply it to that property specifically and factor in key life safety building code requirements. So what they do effectively, to summarize this for you, is measure from the farthest corner of the classroom, out of the classroom, out to the main, your ingress egress, out to the outdoors. So if you don't have enough doors in close proximity, there's a limit on the distance that can people have to travel to exit the building. That gets modified. Might have to add a door, but that's the main life safety issue that has to be accounted for in the layout. And you don't want to go into design development, DD, or construction documents, CD, with some gap in the design that's going to have to be modified later, where you'd have to add a hallway or door access, because your door might be in a location where it doesn't just lead out to your parking lot. If it's on the side of the building where there's just landscaping and property line, well, the city's going to say, well, okay, but what's the topo over there? Do you have a sidewalk? Can we access it when they're exiting the building? All those things have to be accounted for in schematics. So what I have done is worked through a couple of relationships with architects that will help us in that initial schematic. And what's important here from a budget, from a timing perspective, schedule is typically a shooting range project is going to go through, a flurry of work and then stop, and then more work and then stop, and then while other things are happening. So when you're stopping, it's not that you're stopping the project, but you're stopping the design process, pausing it rather, and then pick back up when you're ready, either with zoning approvals or financing steps that need to be secured. Otherwise, you may end up in a situation where an architect is saying, all right, commit to me, architect, with my contract that you're going to navigate, that you're going to agree to this entire process start to finish. And they're going to assume, in many cases, that they can go ahead and pull the trigger on designing what you hand them, your kind of schematic, back of the napkin sort of drawing. And they're going to go all the way through design development. And in my experience, that's just a mistake. You need total control. And the way to get this is just to frame it up front, to say to your architectural team, hey, I need to take this stick figure drawing and make it schematic. And then I'm going to stop, because I have other things that are going to be going on that I've got to deal with. Architect doesn't really know what those are, but it doesn't matter. You just need the ability to say, I'm going to pause it. And they need to account for that in their workload, their allocation of resources for the number of projects that they have going on. Just because, it's typically going to be a 6-figure expense, and they want to compile those fees as quickly as possible, keep their team busy, but that's not a fit for us, for you as a owner operator typically. So building in that framework and expectation of start and then pause and then do some more work and then pause needs to be factored in. Now, on a more granular level, the schematics are not enough data for full pricing, like legitimate pricing. If you're working with me, you'll work through the budget process and we'll assign some pricing on a per square foot basis for the construction that the GC is going to be responsible for, along with all the other budget items. But you need a pricing set from your architect. So if you're working with myself and the architect that I bring to the table, her name is Sandy. I have a couple of them actually, but Sandy's kind of my primary. Then we'll go through that schematic design. And once that's approved and good, and you have whatever other approvals, whether it's zoning or financing or otherwise, then we take that next step to go to pricing. So pricing is really going to boil down to, all right, what size pipe, how many linear feet or square feet of pipe or wall or yards of concrete, etc. All that has to be determined. But the pricing set from an architectural perspective really comes into focus when you say, all right, I'm going with like the Home Depot finishes, if that's applicable to you, or I've got a luxury brand design that I'm after, and then all of the selections are made accordingly. Home Depot versus luxury, and that's door schedule, hardware for those doors, the windows, how big they are, etc. Your floor finishes, how many paint colors you have, the quantity of paint colors and variations of paint colors will be a determining factor. If everything's just white, it's one color all the way through, painter's going to price it more affordably versus several colors. They got to go through the process of changing. So nailing down those finishes in that as a part of that schematic design process, and creating clarity for your architect to go through design development and construction documents, which is a great benefit. We want them on board. We need them on board because they know the contractor that's going to be involved more than likely, and the city or county or parish that you're working in, they're going to know those people. And so there's real value in having the architect of record be your architect in your market. And they take our plans, which are gun range, shooting range, FFL related design issues taken into account already. And that local architect does not have to go through this learning curve of what does it mean to build a gun range. As an owner operator, they generally aren't going to have a lot of insight, typically, more than 9 times out of 10. So having myself and my team working through that process of design with you for those purposes is highly recommended, and makes for a more the benefit in all of this is that the higher quality the plans are, the more clear the documentation is for the general contractor when it comes time for them to bid. The more clarity that they have, the fewer exemptions and exclusions are going to be in the GC's budget documentation and within their pricing. So exemptions and exclusions are layman's description, and maybe a less favorable one would be, here's where we're not sure, or here's where we might have questions that are not necessarily answered within the construction documents. So we're building in some buffer and an excuse to come back and say, this is where we said we didn't know what the cost was going to be. And the benefit of myself and Sandy in the design process is we include in those drawings and or in notes what the architect of record and the general contractor are going to need to provide you with a solid pricing set of a bid contract. That bid document will then be used with the bank and bank underwriting, and the higher degree of certainty that we can provide to them, the less likely there is for change orders and delays and so forth. So I hope that's a helpful rundown on the design process. The same applies particularly with a civil engineer when when you're building from scratch. So same 3 phases: schematic, design development, CDs. They have to work in conjunction with the architect, but that's probably a whole nother video that's coming that I need to kind of walk through and describe how that relationship works and help create some clarity and predictability. But a lot of this is in how and what you communicate to your architect of record and to your GC, ultimately explaining to you what you need and when and what your abilities are in this arrangement that will put you in the driver's seat, put you in control, and not them and their design process and their needs and wants from a fee generation perspective. So hope that's helpful. If you got any questions, please let me know.